Let's talk about making gentle parenting achievable for single parents. My name's Jodie Thornton, and I see a lot of really terrible advice online for single parents who are trying to be gentle parents. There's a lot of focus on if it's really hard for you, just lean on your village. And look, I know that some people have no village and some people have some village, and yes, there are definitely some areas in our culture that encourage us not to ask for help or to make us feel guilty about asking for help. But I honestly don't know any parents, single or partnered, that actually have the kind of village that would create the ideal situation for a parent to really do their best in. I just don't know anyone at all that has that kind of village. So, it's kind of like, well, I would if I had the kind of village that would help. I have seen other people talk about gentle parenting is much easier if you just focus on self-care. But to me, I have a fundamental objection to the idea that when we do self-care, we fill ourselves up, and then when we're parenting, we're draining ourselves. And for me, I fundamentally disagree that parenting needs to be draining, and I know it does feel draining at a certain stage in the journey, but I have to say that I don't believe that it's inherently draining. Now, here's the exception to the rule. For single parents, it's not just the parenting part that I would argue you can get to a place where it's not actually draining. But for a single parent, it's the physicality of everything. You're doing everything on your own. And I think that this is a really fundamental distinction. If you think about just meals and preparing the bags for daycare and carrying the financial load for the family, like there's so many things that it is actually draining in a way. It's inherently draining in a way that I don't think it needs to be necessarily for a partnered parent. And I think that there's another piece where fundamentally most of the gentle parenting advice is please parent as though you have no baggage, right? And this is, in my view, not very healthy. However, if you are a partnered parent, even if your partner is not exactly the ideal person that, in terms of a true partner in the parenting sense, you can have a break from time to time. You're not feeling like you're the only adult. It's a different level of pressure. And I think that the idea that a person who is parenting on their own can pretend as though they have no baggage, it's just unachievable. And so I really want to talk about where I help single parents to focus so that we make gentle parenting an achievable thing. And I think this is the very first thing, is that we really want to look at gentle parenting as a concept. The way it's discussed is as though we create an environment that's ideal for the child. And that would be great if it's achievable for people to do. But for the vast majority of us, we are in an economic situation that's not ideal. We are in an emotional situation where we have a lot of baggage that is yet to be processed. We may have practical concerns that are not necessarily ideal. We don't actually need to create an ideal situation for a child to be gentle parented. If we take a different view, is that instead of everything is perfect in our home, if we take the view that gentle parenting is really about creating an environment where children can learn the skills they need for a couple of purposes. Emotional skills, so emotional awareness, emotional regulation, really understanding what their emotions are telling them about their needs. Like, that is a really important set of skills that a child can learn. And we don't need to be perfect in the way we create an environment for those skills to happen. Secondly, if we look at a number of skills around communication, so being able to ask for what you need, and children are capable of this at a very, very young age. There's just some strategies of how we build those skills in our kids. And then if we look at baggage handling, and so for when we have very young children, most of our baggage handling is focused on ourselves. So how do we handle our baggage? How do we handle not just the things that came that became part of our baggage as in our own childhoods, but also looking at the unhealthy cultural messages that we have internalized, that now, if we look at the most common ones now, it's like racism and gender stereotypes. It's all of these things where we have internalized unhealthy cultural messages, and we want to unpack that baggage so that we don't pass it on to our children. Now, in the beginning, when our children are quite small, we really just focus on our own baggage. As our children get older, we're also looking at the baggage that our children pick up from other places. So, for example, if you were previously partnered and your child has another parent involved and you're no longer together, there may be baggage that they're picking up from that home. There may also just be baggage from like the places where we have imperfectly parented because we were doing the best that we can. We really want to help our children learn to notice and unpack that baggage. And so as your children are getting older, the primary responsibility of noticing that and helping your child to unpack that is with you. But as they get even older, when they get into their tween and teen and young adult years, we want them to be independent with that. We want them to be able to say, oh, I've picked up this piece of baggage from my child, or oh, I've picked up this baggage from our culture, and it's not healthy for me, and here's how I'm going to process that. And if it's something that I can't actually process myself, I'm going to go and get some help from somebody else, whether it's you as their parent, whether it's someone else that they trust, or a professional they feel comfortable saying, I have found that there's this piece of baggage and I don't want to carry it anymore and I want help to release it. Those are the skills we're looking for. And so if we think about gentle parenting, instead of the environment needs to be ideal, and we move into, we want to create emotional skill sets, communication skill sets, and baggage handling skill sets, then we can take a lot of the pressure off of the things that are actually unachievable for some single parents. And, you know, I think that there are many circumstances for single parents to be in, but we know that just practically there are more challenges from a practical perspective for single parents, and also emotional, I would say, as well. So if we take that view that instead of I have to make the environment look like, you know, it would pass criticism on, you know, Facebook gentle parenting pages, and we move more to we're building these skills, then all we need to do is look at what's the next thing to do, right? What's the next skill that your child needs? What's the next skill that you need to build? And which leads me to our next part, which is actually focusing on what drains you as the parent or what triggers you as a parent the most. So if it's their tantrums, then let's start with that. If it's them not listening, let's start with that. If the kids are lashing out physically to you or to each other, and that's the thing that either drains you or triggers you the most, that's where we need to start. And so the reason for that is that whenever you're emotionally drained, even if you're able to maintain an exterior of calm, ultimately you are emotionally disconnected. You cannot be emotionally present when you are pushing down the feelings that you've got. Right? So if it's draining you and leaving nothing in the tank, or if it's triggering you and making you either lose your cool or have to disconnect in order to cope, then that's the piece we start with. And the more we just do one thing at a time, the more we create more emotional space for you, then everything becomes easier. Bit by bit, it becomes easier. And once we get to a place where you're comfortable, so you're not getting drained day to day, you're not getting triggered day to day, it's a rare occurrence that you get drained or triggered, then we look at, okay, so where are each of your kids up to? Where are they up to with their emotional awareness? Where are they up to with their ability to communicate how they're feeling and what they need? Where are they up to at their ability to problem solve so that everybody is considered? There's no people pleasing going on, but also everybody's getting their needs met, right? We're being considerate, but we're not acquiescing. Where are we at with that for each of the kids? And we just start with what's the next thing. And then the last thing is that baggage handling. So where are we at with that? How are you going with your baggage? How are each of the kids going with any baggage they may have picked up? And we just do some processing around that. And so that's the piece. So that first thing is we take a skills-based approach rather than a needing to make it a picture-perfect approach. Then if we look at what are the things that drain you or trigger you most often or most intensely, and we just do one thing at a time and we move through it so that it becomes, you know how to handle it in a way that you can actually stay emotionally present, that you can relax and you can enjoy parenting. I know for some people that in and of itself feels really unrealistic, but I promise you it is possible. We've got to get through, a few things before we can get there. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about is really being very careful about whose advice you listen to. So don't listen to the advice of any parenting experts who don't understand what families look like when it's not a nuclear, cis het, relationship, right? If we don't have an understanding of what does a blended family look like, what does a single parent family look like when the ex is not involved, what does a single parent family look like when the ex is involved and it's dramatic, what does the single parent family look like when the ex is involved and it's constructive and, whilst there's still practical implications, it's still something that's constructive and helpful for you, the relationship that they have with you and the kids. What does a single parent family look like when there is no other parent for whatever reason, right? When we look at the kinds of advice that is dismissive of this kind of experience, what this tells us is two things. One is that they are not going to truly understand what it is that you need, the challenges that you're facing, and what's realistic and achievable for you. The second thing it tells us is that ultimately they don't understand what it means to build these skills in your children. Because if you're relying on the idea that there's another parent, if you're relying on the idea that there's this magical village that you may or may not have access to, if they're relying on all these other things, they actually don't understand that really when it gets down to the very base of what gentle parenting is, what we're talking about is raising people who know who they are in themselves, who can see and hear and love other people, who can accept their own baggage and other people's baggage, who can work together to find ways that work for everybody involved, so we're considerate but we're not people pleasing, and that we understand that people don't need to be perfect, right? If we look at how gentle parenting speaks about parenting, it's this idea that our children should never be in a situation where someone else's baggage impacts them or someone else's lack of skills impacts them. And I don't know about you, but I have not found a place in this world where the people are healed, where the people have, emotional and communication skills that they need to be able to handle it, where there's no unhealthy cultural messages. The place doesn't exist. And so we're not trying to raise children who can only function well in, I want to say the perfect arrangement, but even that grates on me because it's not perfect. It's like what our culture has decided is perfect is a mother and a father, 2.2 children. I can't remember what the saying was, but whatever the thing is, and everything's ideal and there's no financial pressure and there's no anything, like all of these things. That is not even it's not even the ideal, right? We know that it's not just about the cis het, typical arrangement of the world. When we know that families come in different shapes and sizes, people are individuals. There aren't any people in this world, or at least extremely few people in this world, that have no baggage that impacts their relationships. That's not our job, is to teach our children how to function well when everybody around them is able to pretend like there's no problems. What we want is to raise people who become adults who can look around and go, well, I can see this is going great and this is a challenge. These are the things I choose to change in the world. Here's how I can have healthy relationships with them. These are the people that I can have a healthy relationship with. These are the people that it's actually really hard for me to be my full self around. And so instead of trying to, you know, save them or fix them, I'm going to choose not to have a relationship with those people, right? This is living in reality. And I think that when we pay attention to the parenting experts who, you know, when they say make sure you take breaks when you're overwhelmed, and you're like, well, but I can't take a break. Well, get your partner to help. I don't have one. Well, you know, make sure you've got daycare. Well, maybe I can't afford it, or maybe there's another reason why I don't want to access daycare for my child, or I can't access daycare for my child. Like, there's what that basically tells you is that they have a fixed view of the world, and they don't recognize that we're actually raising people to live in reality, right? This is and so I really would encourage you to just stop following any of those people, right? Like, don't listen to them when they have such a fixed view of what is and isn't achievable, and when they have such a fixed view of the path that we need to take to get from one to the other. It's a very well-regarded parenting book that I decided I would listen to it because everybody was talking about it. And this was when Sarah was very young. She might have been like a year old or something like that. So at the time I had 2 teenagers, 2 little kids, and it was really, I was struggling for time. And so I bought this book on Audible so that I could listen to the words rather than having to stop and read, because I didn't have time to stop and read. And like, it was the most excruciating situation, because the very first chapter was all about telling you what are the consequences of your child having an imperfect childhood. And it was excruciating because I was doing the dishes at the time and the headphones were in my ears and I couldn't access the stop button immediately because it was so guilt-inducing, right? And it basically talks about, if you don't get it as a child, then these are all the things that are going to happen to you as an adult. And I fundamentally disagree. And I know there are consequences to when, you know, we are not able to provide an ideal environment for our kids. But how many of us who are deeply committed to gentle parenting, how many of us did not get gentle parenting, right? Clearly, the ability to see that gentle parenting is important and it is valuable for children is not contingent on having been raised that way, right? And ultimately, like, I have helped parents change the way they parent and change the way they see themselves, undo their baggage that they've grown up with. Like, it is possible. We don't have to be perfect. We're raising kids to live in a real world where they're surrounded with people who are doing their best, and we want them to be able to create healthy relationships and really know themselves. And so when we get away from this idea that there's, you know, 2 parents in every home, or that, you know, the one, and this is a partnered example, but it goes to the point. I remember watching someone once who was saying, if your partner doesn't agree with you, then maybe get on the same page by just asking them to sit down and watch a video with you. And I just burst out laughing, because there is no way my husband would have sat, and I still think he wouldn't sit down and watch a parenting video with me. It's just not going to happen. And it's that closed-minded, not understanding the reality of what many parents are dealing with. Just unfollow those people. Unfollow them all. Just don't listen to them. So I hope this has been helpful. If you are looking for some help around the things that trigger you most or drain you most, I have a tensions webinar that is available for you free of charge. I also have a webinar on helping your children to listen, and a webinar on helping children stop hitting, biting and kicking. So if any of those are something that is draining you or triggering you at the moment, you can grab those free. I'll put the links in the show notes. And if you ever want to ask a question about how I would support you as a single parent to achieve your goals in a way that's achievable for you, please do reach out. We can just have a chat about what it is that you're trying to achieve and how I would be able to help you with that. So thank you so much for watching.